What is a history fact that is so stupid it doesn't seem real? It is said that Greek tragedian, Aeschylus, died because an eagle dropped a tortoise on his bald head, mistaken for a rock, in order to break the shell of the tortoise. A man from New York missed his friends who were fighting in Vietnam, so he traveled thousands of miles to track them down in a combat zone to personally give them beer and letters from home. He even wrote a book about it called The Greatest Beer Run Ever. Alright, I don't remember the specifics, but there was a king, I believe a Sumerian king, who was told by an oracle that disaster would befall the king, so he had a gardener crowned as king for a day, and that night the gardener would be executed, thus fulfilling the prophecy and saving the real king. Soon after the gardener's coronation, the real king choked on soup and died. The gardener ruled for 24 years. Honduras and El Salvador had a 3-day war over a football game. Not one but two kings of France died by smashing their heads on the top part of a door lintel. Charles VIE in 1498. The shock probably caused something else, but still. Louis II on the other hand was pursuing a fair lady, who was actually trying to escape him, on his horse on the 5th of August 882. When she passed a door, the horse went through, not the king, who broke his skull and died instantly. Tycho Brahe, an astronomer, had a pet moose. That moose later died from a fall down the stairs, because it was drunk. More people have died from drowning at molasses than being attacked by coyotes. In 1956, a man named Tommy Fitzpatrick stole a small plane from New Jersey for a bet and then landed it perfectly on the narrow street in front of the bar he had been drinking at in Manhattan. 2 years later, he did it again after someone didn't believe he had done it the first time. What's also crazy is that the punishment for the first time ended up being only a $100 fine, since the charges were dropped by the owner of the plane, and the second resulted in only 6 months in jail. Here is an article about it. During the Spanish-American War, the Spanish governor of Guam wasn't told about the war. When a US warship showed up, he was happy to see them, cause he thought they were just visiting. Boy was he wrong. 40 dudes held off the German invasion in Belgium for 18 days. They surrendered when they ran out of ammo. The 6th president had a pet alligator and Ryan Reynolds failed drama class. King George III was so constipated while he was taking a crap his heart actually physically burst. As World War II revved up, the US realized that fast and cheap was the way to go with manufacturing ships, ex-Liberty ships. But there was a line of escort carriers made with so little armor that some Japanese armor-piercing shells went through the hull and out the other side without exploding. A nice surprise. Cornflakes were originally marketed as an anti-masturbation cereal, and the man who made them, John Harvey Kellogg, adopted all 8 of his kids and didn't even sleep in the same room as his wife. A quote from Winston Churchill when he was visiting the White House and the president walked in on him buck naked. The Prime Minister of the UK has nothing to hide from the President of the US. A Skylab satellite's guidance system was failing and ended up crash landing in Australia. Instead of giving the satellite back, Skylab was charged with a $500 littering fine. After the fine was paid, the company wanted to put the satellite in a museum but was refused on the basis that since the satellite fell from space, it's legally Australia's now. So now, Skylab pays a monthly rent to Australia to display its own satellite in a museum. Edited for accuracy. Adolf Hitler had many physical ailments, many of which are known. He had in particular severe stomach cramps and also bouts of insomnia. So his quack doctor, Theodor Morell, in his infinite wisdom, gave Hitler sleeping pills and laxative, resulting in very severe gas problems. The reason there isn't a lot of mummies around anymore is because we ate them. In my country, some politicians literally got yeeted out of a window and survived because they fell into some manure. They started a war with the ones who yeeted them after. During World War I, Germany converted and armed a passenger cruise liner, the SMS Cap Trafalgar, into a cruiser, and sent to the Atlantic Ocean to disrupt British shipping. Off the coast of Brazil though, and they received word that a British ship was coming to flush out German ships disrupting British shipping. The SMS Cap Trafalgar decided to disguise itself as another ocean liner turned cruiser, the HMS Carmania. so that they wouldn't be shot at. The British ship that came to deal with the SMS Cap Trafalgar was the HMS Carmania, which promptly sunk the fake one. The guy that my username was named after, King Alfred, pushed back the invading Viking armies and then revolutionized the educational system, social system, legal system, and like a dozen other things. There's a reason he's called Alfred the Great. He was also very famously yelled at by an old lady because he was too busy plotting a military campaign to watch the cakes that she had in the oven. I just find it silly that one of the greatest monarchs in English history was yelled at by an old lady for the same kinds of trivial things that people have been angry at each other over forever. It's an odd juxtaposition. Albert Einstein was offered the presidency of Israel but turned it down. Fidel Castro loved milk so much that when his cow, who holds the world record for most milk produced in a day, died, he had her taxidermied, had a marble statue of her built and a full eulogy and obituary written for her in his state newspaper, and Cuban scientists have repeatedly tried, and failed, to clone her. Her name was Uba Blanca, which means white udder. A Greek philosopher called Chrysippus died from laughing too much at a drunken donkey eating rotting, therefore fermented, figs. Jack Daniels, yeah, that Jack Daniels, died from an infected stub toe caused by him kicking a safe containing money to which he had forgotten the combination. The US and the UK scrapped plots to assassinate Hitler as they believed his poor judgment would bring an end to the war quicker. Bill Clinton, who hasn't been president in 20 years, is 4 years younger than Joe Biden. How the Berlin Wall fell. In order to calm mounting protests, GDR officials decided on loosening travel restrictions between East and West, not open the border completely. Notes of the new rules had been handed to a spokesman who hadn't had time to read them before the press conference. Private travel outside the country can now be applied for without prerequisites, he said. Surprised journalists clamored for more details. Shuffling through his notes, he said that as far as he was aware, it was effective immediately. In fact, it had been planned to start the next day, with details on applying for a visa. But the news was all over television, and East Germans flocked to the border in huge numbers, as the border became inundated with East Berliners wishing to reunite with family and or escape the GDR. Border guards became overwhelmed and with no orders to either shoot upon the crowd or open the gate. Only a handful of guards facing hundreds and thousands of citizens. Rather than fire and create a stampede and potentially kill hundreds, the head of the guards decided to give the order, open the barrier. What came next was a spontaneous chain reaction, with Berliners on both sides arriving at checkpoint Charlie to celebrate this momentous event and to demolish the wall. So basically an ill-prepared functionary made a flippant remark and a border guard captain unable to get orders on how to proceed led to one of the most defining moments of the late 20th century in Europe. Australia lost a war against emus. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both died on the 4th of July 1826. Frederick I, Holy Roman Emperor, drowned because he went for a swim with his armor on. When more people started switching to skim milk, dairy farmers had tons of milk fat left over, so they stored it all in some caves in Missouri. This led the USDA to open a department on dairy management to figure out what to do with it. Want to know why almost every fast food item comes with so much cheese? That's why. France is currently on its 5th republic. The history of how it happened is bizarre. Bourbon Kingdom more than French Revolution with the guillotine more than First Republic more than Napoleon's Empire more than back to the Bourbon Kingdom more than July Monarchy. Different Kingdom more than Second Republic more than Second Empire more than Third Republic more than Nazi occupied France more than Fourth Republic more than Fifth Republic. Fun facts: the Second Empire was led by Napoleon's nephew, Charles Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, who was elected as president of the Second Republic. He changed his name to Napoleon III and declared himself emperor after he was supposed to step down after his one-term presidency. Because of this, the Second French Republic only lasted 4 years since he was the only president of that particular republic. Michigan and Ohio, having a war over Toledo. William Henry Harrison was elected president. The day of his inauguration it was rainy and cold and he didn't wear a hat or a coat, thereby thumbing his nose at moms everywhere. Then later he died of pneumonia. 31 days in office. The Allied powers decided to steal a tank in the middle of a battlefield. Left square bracket. Castrato. Chop him off before puberty. Little boy voice forever with long arms and ribs. Good for opera roles. But pants roles and countertenors are there too. The way the world is today and an immense portion of its problems can be traced back to one 19-year-old kid shooting an archduke in 1914. John Quincy Adams, former US president, would start every day by drinking some whiskey and swimming naked in the Potomac River. Teddy Roosevelt invented the forward pass in American football. There was a real plan to spike Hitler's food with estrogen to try to turn him into a woman and make him give up on war. Hitler estrogen plan. In World War II, the Russians trained dogs to run under tanks with time bombs on their backs. Anti-tank dogs. But the Russians trained the dogs on Russian tanks, so when they set them free on the battlefield they trooned around and started blowing up the Russian tanks instead of the opposition's tanks. The killdozer in the USA like, what the duck was that? Jesse Owens, who I believe was the first African American Olympic gold medalist, won at the 1936 games in Berlin, where the Nazis were in control, came home to the US, only to face Jim Crow laws and a bunch of other awful racial discrimination, including being snubbed by the president. Roman Emperor Caligula declared war on Neptune and ordered his men to stab the sea. After that he collected the seashells as war spoils. Turkmenbashi, the former dictator of Turkmenistan, made owning a dog illegal due to him thinking they smelled bad. Sylvester Graham invented graham crackers to prevent masturbation. Initially in the opening days of World War II, neither side did anything to kick off the war. This period is known today as the Phony War, as it appeared to have been a massive bluff from Germany, Italy, France and Britain. King Charles I of Sweden was killed on campaign near Fredrikstad, Norway, yet nobody knows who killed him for certain. With the 302nd anniversary of his death on the 30th of November, King George I of England died after his heart burst whilst trying to relieve himself due to being constipated from binging on fruit. Edit. This is my most upvoted comments to date. Thank you all. That guy Buzz Aldrin punched for denying the moon landing. The inventor of lobotomy got a Nobel Prize for it. You all think the flat earthers are retarded? There was an actual group that believed the earth is hollow. The US government at the time was extremely close to paying for an exhibition to search for tunnels that were supposedly in the North and South Poles where superior beings lived. This theory was so common President Martin Van Buren actually thought the theories were plausible. It barely lost its vote for funding. This theory was still prominent until 1950s. Everything Olga of Kiev did after her husband was killed by an opposing tribe. The opposing tribe killed him by tying his legs to trees they'd bent down and then releasing the trees. Cliffs. Buried 20 men alive. Burning another 20 alive after she'd lured them into a bathhouse. Slaughtered 5,000 of the opposing tribe's soldiers after she'd gotten them pissed drunk. Telling the opposing tribe she'd end the assaults if each house gave her 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows. She then had her soldiers tie sulfur to each of the birds and set them free so that they would return home to nest in their original villages. Eventually the villagers' bedtime fires would ignite the sulfur and burn the town to the ground. Also she's a saint in the Orthodox and Roman Catholic Church. People used to think women's uterus would go flying if they rode the train. Ergot is a fungus that will grow on the grains of rye. The idea of which is riding brooms comes from ergot salves which would cause hallucinations. The salve would be spread around on the broomstick and then the hem ride the broomstick so that the ergot would be absorbed. You know, those evil heathenistic women enjoying that super phallic broomstick. If ergot was eaten it would cause nausea, convulsions, and gangrenous symptoms among others. There is an ongoing debate that this is actually what spurred the Salem witch trials in 1692. The Persian leader Cambyses II used cats to defeat an Egyptian army. He had his soldiers paint the goddess Bastet, who was cat-like in appearance, on their shields and ranged before his frontline dogs, sheep, cats, ibises and whatever other animals the Egyptians hold dear. The Egyptians, seeing the shields and sacred animals, refused to fight out of fear of injuring them. Because of their refusal to fight they were easily defeated and actually massacred to where their bones were still scattered across the sands years later. Source: a Finnish sniper named Simo Häyhänen was able to kill around 500 Soviet soldiers in the Winter War of 1939 by literally hiding in the snow and taking random shots every couple hours. In March 1940 he was struck in the jaw by an explosive bullet and seriously wounded. He was very disfigured, unconscious, and presumed dead when he was found, and later he was thrown onto a pile of bodies. A fellow soldier noticed a leg twitching in the pile and they brought him home alive. He lived to be 96. Liechtenstein went to war with 80 people and came back with 81. Just off the top of my head. 1. King Henry I died from eating a giant plate of lampreys, a type of small eel, too fast. 2. Then American Vice President Andrew Johnson was so drunk at his vice presidential inauguration that he could not swear the new Congress in and rambled incoherently during his acceptance speech. 3. Pope Stephen VI put the month's dead corpse of Pope Formosus on trial for crimes against the papacy, serving as a bishop without being appointed to the clergy, and a couple of other crimes. 2. He was dug up, propped up in a chair, and a deacon was made to stand behind the body and speak for him. Formosus was found guilty and punished by having his fingers chopped off and buried in an unmarked grave, but the conviction was annulled by a later pope, and reinstated by one of that pope's successors. I believe Formosus is still considered guilty. 4. The Roman Emperor Caligula once declared war on Poseidon, and had his soldiers fight with the waves and collect conch shells as proof of their victory. During World War II, the US military experimented with weaponizing bats via a bat bomb, which would use the rodents to deliver small timed incendiary charges to Japanese villages and other targets. An entire army was scared away by some guy with a lute. There is at least one person, Tsutomu Yamaguchi, who survived both atomic bombs. I don't know if this is incredibly good luck or incredibly bad luck. According to some sources, he was in the middle of describing the Hiroshima bombing when the Nagasaki bomb went off only a few km away. Gorilla gorilla gorilla. This is the scientific name of the western lowland gorilla. The world's first submarine attack took place the 6th of September, 1776 during the American Revolution. The craft was called the Turtle and was essentially a giant oak and metal Christmas ornament powered by two hand-cranked propellers. It was designed to attach waterproofed explosives to the hulls of British warships. However, the pilot kept hitting metal plating when trying to attach the bomb and abandoned the mission due to dwindling air supply. All subsequent missions were failures as well, and eventually the ship transporting the Turtle was sunk with the vessel on board. Also, during World War II, Americans tried to develop pigeon-guided missiles. The idea was that they would be guided by a pigeon inside the missile, pecking at the target, visible through a windshield in the missile. All the simulation tests proved it could be done. But sadly Project Pigeon, as it was called, was never given the funding it needed to become a reality. Live pigs were hung from battlements as a defense against siege elephants. Americans British used inflatable vehicles that looked like jeeps and tanks to fool the Germans before D-Day. Whilst on his deathbed, George Washington was drained of almost half his blood and given treatments that caused him to violently vomit and it himself. He died anyway. Not only did Australia lose its 17th Prime Minister at the beach, he drowned, but we named a public swimming pool after him. In 1184, a number of nobles from across the Holy Roman Empire were meeting in a room at the Church of St. Peter, and their combined weight caused the floor to collapse into the latrine beneath the cellar and led to dozens of nobles drowning in liquid excrement. It is referred to as the Erfurt latrine disaster. The Siege of Tyre. Basically, Alexander the Great was unable to capture the city because it was an impenetrable fortress on an island. So he decided to make it into a peninsula to be able to properly attack it. I love this comic representation of the events by flock of cows showing just how ridiculous it was. The fax machine predates the American Civil War. Shortly before the US Civil War, abolition was such a heated topic that due to it on one occasion a congressman brought a cane to Congress and beat another politician with it. One that I always think of, William the Conqueror exploded at his funeral. Short of it, the intestinal infection that killed him ended up eating up his body from the inside. All the gas from the decomposition was trapped in there, But as some people tried to fit him back into his coffin, his body exploded from the pressure. Guess he had to go out with a bang. Two of Napoleon's marshals secured a critical bridge crossing in the war against Austria by casually strolling up to it and insisting to the Austrian sappers that an armistice had been signed. They delayed the destruction of the bridge for long enough for French soldiers to get in position to seize it properly. Benjamin Hornigold was a pirate in the late 16 and early 1700s who once robbed a merchant vessel purely for the crew's hats because he and his crew got so drunk the night before that they all threw their own hats overboard for no good reason. The Titanic lookouts did not have binoculars. It was believed they had accidentally been left in Southampton, but they were locked in a safe on board. That the war between Zanzibar and Britain lasted for only 38 minutes. It's the shortest recorded war in history. A British soldier, Private Bill Millen, marched up and down Sword Beach on D-Day, the 6th of June, 1944, playing the bagpipes to inspire the invading troops. Two captured German snipers revealed he hadn't been shot at because the Germans thought he was dumb cop for foolhardy idiot. In the mid-1800s, Europe was hit by a huge blight of aphids that were destroying the grapevines, so French winemakers sent vines over to the US cause the aphids in the US wouldn't hurt them, thus saving the French wine industry. In World War II, the UK sent the Magna Carta and other documents to be stored in Fort Knox with the US gold reserves. France sent a huge portion of the Louvres out there as well. Early humans used to bore massive holes in each other's skulls to cure a myriad of ailments. Without anesthesia, and with stone tools. A woman named Violet Jessop survived not only the sinking of the Titanic, but also the destruction of both of the Titanic's sister ships. A guy from Nashville, William Walker, became the president of Nicaragua and later was murdered in Honduras, BC. He tried some more bullet there. The fact that a US Navy destroyer sank a Japanese sub by firing potatoes at it. Europeans used to consume ground up mummies. Rudy Giuliani's press conference outside a landscaping business between a sex shop and a crematorium. Fighting a war on two fronts. Looking at you, Germany. The story of the USS Willie D. damn near killed the president with a torpedo. General Santa Anna got captured during the Battle of San Jacinto by the Texans while he was taking a writ. They literally caught him with his pants down. President of France F registered Saint-Lix Faure died from getting a blowjob from his mistress. That one president that gambled and lost the Chinaware in the White House on a single bet. I believe it was Warren Harding. John Tyler, the 10th US president, who was born in 1790 and died in 1862, had two grandsons living until recently. One of them passed in October at the age of 95. The other is still living. Carrots don't actually help improve eyesight. It was a lie made up by the British during World War II to hide their radar technology and explain how British pilots always knew where the Germans were coming from. Before it became a state, Michigan invaded Ohio because we wanted the Toledo area. The Ohioans were scared, so they all ran away, and the only casualty was a pig. The federal government had to step in and they gave us the Upper Peninsula, so we leave Ohio alone. Michael Jordan makes more money from Nike annually than all the Nike workers in Malaysia combined.